Within objects, just like arrays, you can hold string values, you can have number values, and you can also have Boolean values. So Boolean values are the ones that can either be true or false. So that's the two values for the Boolean value. And then those can be added in, and as well within the object, you can have an array, and the array can have multiple pieces of data. So if you want to extract the information contained within the object, you'd have to loop through the data. We saw that if we can select the main object and then the property name, and that's going to return back the value. We also saw in the last lesson that we can output values within the dot notation as well as the bracket notation. And there's more information about this over at the Mozilla Developer Network. And also, if you are using the bracket notation, if you have an object within an object, in order to return back that information, you could set it with the two property names. So let's provide one more example of that. So this is going to be an object, and it will be just the courses. And then each one of the courses here is going to also be an object. So this can be the name of the course. So in order to return back the name JavaScript of the course, and also let's add in some more values here. So we'll just say length and 15 for the length. So if we wanted to return back the length value, you can go ahead and pause the video and try out this example by returning back the value of the course's length. And then I'll walk you through how to do that as well. So select the person, the object name, and using the bracket notation, let's select the courses, and that's going to return back that object. And then within the object that's contained within the object, let's return back the value of length, and that's going to be 15. And we can also get the value for the property name of name, and that's going to return back the course name. So also within here, you might also have multiple courses, so that would be an array. And wrapping it within an array, let's now return back that courses. And because we have an array in here, this is going to represent an array of items. We can reference the index value of the item that we want to return back. And then also, if we want to see the length, we can specify it that way. So these can get fairly lengthy depending on how much data you've got within the object. And the nice thing about it is that if you have multiple items within an array, you can also, if they should be structured the same way so that it's easier to iterate through them. So let's go ahead and we're going to create and add in a few other courses. So there might be an HTML course, and the length of the HTML might be 10, and the CSS course might be 20 in length. So now we've got a really fairly complex object. And usually if you do want to output the content, and if you want to work with the courses, you can loop through and you can get the values of the contents of the course by specifying and creating a new variable name for the courses. So I'll just set that up and then selecting person and courses. That's going to return back the courses within a courses object, and that will allow us to loop through the courses and return back each one of the courses. You can use a for each loop to loop through them, and then within the for each loop we can specify a course name. We can also get the index value, and using the arrow notation, and just as we would with any other array, we can loop through and we can get all of the course information. And then once the course information has been selected within a course variable name, you can output each one of the course values by using something like course name, and that will reference the current course name as it loops through. In order to get the property values within an object, you can also create a loop for that. So looping through the property values, and let's select the property in object, and we need to specify the object, which is person. and we'll console log out what we get back for property. So here we have, I'll comment out these console messages so that as we loop through the object information, so the object which is person, we're returning back each one of the property names as prop and logging it out into the console. And that's where we get the first name, last name, x1, x2, interests, and courses. And it doesn't indicate whether these are going to be arrays or other objects that are contained within there. It just returns back whatever the property name is. And then it's up to you to loop through and navigate through to that property name to find out what's contained within that property. You can also return back the keys of an object. So if you just wanted to get the key values of an object, so let's use the object and look for keys within the object. And then within the parameters, specify the object. And then you can log out keys in order to see all of the keys of that current object. And that's going to be created and added into an array. And then within this array, then you could loop through keys and use for each to loop through each one and return back each one of the keys. And in this case, you could select person, key, and that will loop through each one of the keys that are contained within the object and output the response here. So we've got Lawrence, Svekis, so 1, 2, so it's outputting them all according to the keys. And then when it gets to the array within there, it outputs that, and then the object that's contained within there as well. If you want to get the values, you can do a very similar thing as we did with the keys, where you can output the values of the object. And instead of using keys, let's output the values of person and then log out whatever we've got for values. And I'll comment out the other console messages so that we're only returning back an array of whatever the values are within each one. So this is a way that you can access the values easily that are contained within the object and put it within an array. And then the same thing that we saw with the keys, you could iterate through each one of the values because now it's within an array and output the value into the console or do any other type of calculations that you want to do. So this is actually just returning back the values, so we don't have to reference the object and just outputting each one of the values. So it's actually separated out from the object. You can also get the entity entries that are within each one of the object items. And let's create another variable. And this one, instead of values, is going to be object entries, and specify the object name there. And that's the object that we're looking for. And then output the entries. And let's output that into the console, comment out the other ones. So this way, what it does is it constructs an array of all of the properties that are within the object and provides the property name as the first item within the index of the array, and then the property value as the second item. And then that goes for all of the items that are within the array. So once you've converted an object into an array, so either using the keys, values, or entries, you can loop through it just as it would be a normal array. So we saw that you can use the for each to loop through the array. And then there's also a similar loop. So there's the for loop, which is similar to the one that we used to loop through the properties within the object. And you can loop through it that way as well using the for loop. So let's take the key value and actually just call it the array of entries. And this will loop through each one of the items, assigning a value to the array. And save again, just to remove out. So we see that we've got each one of the array items. So we can list out the property, and then the value, because we're using the entries, so it's converted into an array. So it's listing out the property, the value, property value, all the way down. So go ahead and try it out, make and update your object information, adding in more complexity into it. So checking out the different courses and adding in an array of objects, of items there, loop through it and output it with the keys, values, and entries into the console. And you'll be ready to move on to the next lesson. The lesson challenge: create an object, loop through the contents of the object, add an array within the object as a value, add another object within that object as a value as well.